A pale moon hovers over a field long stripped of life, its cold light glimmering on shattered helmets and rusted rifle barrels half swallowed by the earth. A low whine carries a voice older than any map, drifting through the fog like a funeral dirge. Beware the year 2025, when the dragon and the bear shall clash, and victory shall crown the Eastern power. Jeane Dixon, My Life and Prophecies, 1969. Jeane Dixon, celebrated for foretelling JFK's fall and the horrors of September morning, penned this warning more than half a century ago. To modern ears, it sounded like poetic hyperbole, a relic of Cold War anxiety. Yet as 2025's shadow looms, the tremors in Beijing and Moscow grow impossible to ignore. Plow war games in the South China Sea synchronize with snap inspections of Russia's Far Eastern brigades. Joint cyber exercises probing the vulnerabilities of Western infrastructure. Diplomats trading veiled threats in hushed corridors. Tonight, we peel back the veil between prophecy and reality. We'll trace Dixon's secret timeline from her coded margin notes in 1969 to the newly declassified Kremlin archives, suggesting an unspoken pact forged in 2018. We lines overlay today's headlines: China's stealth bomber patrols off Alaska, Russia's east wind drills in Siberia, with the threads of Dixon's vision, weaving a narrative that begins on the frozen steppes of the Urals and surges across northern Europe, through the sun-scorched deserts of North Africa, all the way to the oil fields of the Persian Gulf. Stay close as we unveil 1. Dixon's life and the mysterious birth of her 2025 prophecy. 2. The hidden codes in her 1969 manuscript. 3. The accelerating arc of Sino Russian cooperation. 4. A phase-by-phase timeline to 05 to 0375. The cataclysmic stakes for the global order. The hourglass sands slip ever lower. When the first shot echoes in the Siberian dusk, will history record Jeane Dixon as seer or Cassandra? Born Lydia Emma Pinkert in 1904 on a small Missouri farm, Jeane Dixon transformed herself from an obscure Midwestern girl into America's best-known psychic. By the 1950s, her syndicated astrology column in Parade magazine reached tens of millions each week. In 1956, she issued a chilling prediction: a Democrat would win the presidency and be assassinated or die in office. When John F. Kennedy fell in Dallas in 1963, her reputation soared, though scholars later coined the Jeane Dixon effect to remind us that her many misses tend to vanish from the public memory while her hits are immortalized. In 1969, Dixon compiled her most ambitious work, My Life and Prophecies, and buried within its pages one particular warning that has refused to fade. Between 2025 and 2037, the Great Bear of the North and the Dragon of the East shall wage war, a war initiated by China, won by China, shifting the balance of power forever. Russia will strike in Africa and the sands of the Middle East, but its strength will falter beneath the dragon's onslaught. For decades, academics argued that Dixon simply echoed the Cold War's darkest anxieties, white-knuckle fears of Soviet expansion paired with China's rising communism. Yet the striking precision of her timeline, pinpointing both start and end dates across four distinct theaters, has kept believers riveted and skeptics intrigued. 3 pillars undergird her vision. 1. Start date: 2025. No vague near future, but a calendar year. 2. Initiator and victor: China, an aggressive Eastern power that both strikes first and claims ultimate triumph. 3. Geographic span: Siberia, Northern Europe, Africa, Middle East, suggesting global reverberations well beyond the Eurasian heartland. Today, Dixon's words have exploded across social media and on TikTok. The hashtag #Dixon2025 has amassed over 45 million views, while YouTube compilations of her 1969 prediction approach 60 million views and counting. Even mainstream outlets like Foreign Policy and The Economist have referenced her timeline in recent analyses of Sino-Russian defense cooperation and the evolving security architecture of Central Asia. Yet is this all mere coincidence? In late 2024, Russian, and Chinese military planners conducted unprecedented joint naval drills in the Baltic and South China Sea locations eerily reminiscent of Dixon's Northern Europe and sands of the Middle East. Simultaneously, bilateral trade surged past $500 billion, reinforcing the image of an ironclad partnership. As we prepare to decode Dixon's hidden timeline and overlay it onto our era as geopolitical flashpoints, one question looms. Are we witnessing the unfolding of a prophetic blueprint, or simply the convergence of history's most powerful forces? The line between prescience and pattern-seeking has never felt thinner. Dixon's 1969 prophecy was never laid out as a simple timeline. Instead, she wove her dates into coded symbols. 3 keys unlock her secret chronology. 1. Numeric anchors. Dixon revered the numbers 13 and 37 to 13 for upheaval, 37 for divine intervention. Beginning in 1969, she hinted that adding 56, a multiple of 13 plus a hidden offset, would bring the world to the brink of conflict. Sure enough, 1969 plus 56 equals 2025. 2. Astrological alignments in my life and prophecies. She described a rare Jupiter-Mars conjunction in Cancer as the spark for China's rise. Modern skywatchers note that in late February 2025, 6 planets from Mars and Jupiter to Neptune arched across the ecliptic, culminating on February 28 in a full 7-planet parade. Astrologers saw this as the mirror omen Dixon predicted. 3. Festival and Jubilee cycles. A devout Catholic, Dixon referenced biblical jubilees every 50 years. From the Cultural Revolution's end in 1966 to 2025 spans 59 years, one jubilee plus a mystical season. When these 3 anchors converge, a four-phase conflict emerges. Phase 1 2025 to 2028, initial skirmishes on the Siberian borderlands. As the new year dawns, Russian outposts along the Amur and USS Yuri rivers, long fortified but understaffed, face sudden incursions. In June 2025, President Putin confirmed that Russia and China would hold joint military exercises, signaling a shift from cooperation to co-belligerence. Phase to 2029 to 2032. Invasion of Northern Europe via Arctic routes. By 2029, ice melting opens the Northern Sea route. In September 2024, Northern Interaction 2024 drills in the Sea of Japan and Sea of Okhotsk presaged this phase. Soon, already in early 2025, China inked nearly 24 space and infrastructure pacts across Africa, winning strategic footholds while America falters. Chinese icebreakers and assault ships surge into the Arctic, cutting off Scandinavia from the Atlantic. Phase 3 2033 to 2035, proxy confrontations in Africa and the Middle East. Dixon foresaw Russia striking in deserts and savannas but bleeding out under China's shadow. Already in early 2025, China inked nearly 24 space and infrastructure pacts across Africa, winning strategic footholds while America falters. In Khartoum, Beijing's heavy hand surfaced when it publicly pressed Sudan on a Darfur peace plan in April 2025, underscoring its deepening leverage. Phase for 2036 to 2037. Final stand and Chinese triumph. In Dixon's vision, the bear and all its weary satellites staggers beneath the dragon's final onslaught. A shattered Kremlin dome yields, and the world order remaps itself around Beijing's victory. What makes Dixon's hidden timeline so haunting is how these phases echo today's headlines. From celestial alignments to Arctic maneuvers, from African space pacts to Sudan's turmoil. As each coded omen unfolds, we edge closer to the prophecy's fateful crescendo, and the question remains, are we charting inevitable history, or manifesting it with every step? On the evening of July 13, 2025, Beijing's autumn sky bore a bruised purple as foreign ministers Sergei Lavrov and Wang Yi stood beneath flags of their 2 nations. Cameras captured their broad smiles as they reaffirmed the no-limits partnership forged in 2022, an alliance they said would reshape the United Nations, SCO, and BRICS. But in whispered corridors beyond the glare of flashbulbs, diplomats spoke of clipped phrases and cautious glances. Beneath the veneer of unity, Fissures were widening. By dawn, the true depth of Sino Russian entanglement came into view. In Moscow, Kremlin economists reveled in last year's figures. Bilateral trade had climbed to a record $244.8 billion in 2024, up from $240.1 billion the year before, with energy exports oil, gas, and coal making up roughly two-thirds of that total. China purchased discounted Russian crude and liquefied natural gas, while Russia imported advanced electronics, high-speed rail components, and consumer goods. Every tank of oil sent eastward and every chip shipped westward forged tighter economic chains. Across Siberia, Chinese engineers were laying tracks for a brand new high-speed rail line, part of Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. As the final tie plates were bolted, Beijing's influence seeped into the Russian Far East. Local governors now consulted Chinese energy firms on pipeline expansions. Joint ventures oversaw ports once under purely Russian control. The mighty power of Siberia gas pipeline Line since 2019 pumped both fuel and geopolitics into the region, melding Russian infrastructure decisions with Beijing's strategic calculus. Yet this interdependence harbored a darker undercurrent: mistrust. Earlier in 2025, a top-secret FSB counterintelligence report leaked to the press warned that Chinese operatives had infiltrated facilities tied to Russia's Neptune cruise missile program, lifting schematics and propulsion data to Beijing's coffers. Within weeks, Ukraine's SBU arrested a Chinese father and son team in Kiev, accusing them of smuggling classified Neptune documents to China, an operation that Kiev insisted benefited Moscow's war effort in Ukraine. Moscow publicly downplayed the leak. Beijing denied any wrongdoing. Privately, both capitals seethed. Meanwhile, their global footprints diverged. In Tripoli and Benghazi, Russia's Wagner Group, now partially absorbed into a state-run Africa Corps, held sway through military bases and mercenary contracts, securing mineral concessions and power in former colonial outposts. But in Addis Ababa and Nairobi, Chinese money spoke louder than gunfire. High-speed rail links, megadams, and digital currency networks poured billions into local economies, outpacing any Russian arms for access deals. In Khartoum, Beijing's diplomats brokered port leases on the Red Sea. Moscow's soldiers watched from afar. Farther east, fault lines cut deeper. Russia's lucrative arms sales to Pyongyang air defense batteries, artillery shells, and missile guidance kits angered Beijing, which feared a reckless neighbor rattling sabers along its northeastern border. North Korea's willingness to supply troops and technology to Russia and Ukraine only inflamed Chinese anxieties over stability in the region. By nightfall, Kremlin strategists pored over satellite imagery and trade forecasts. Economic lifelines bound them to China, yet espionage scandals and competing ambitions gnawed at the partnership's core. The No Limits Pact, born of convenience in 2022, now risked fraying under the strain of diverging priorities. And above it all, Jeane Dixon's prophecy pulsed like a warning beacon. In her coded vision, the bear of the North would clash with the dragon of the East in 2025, with China's might outlasting Russia's resolve. As pipelines snaked across Siberia and spies slipped through missile silos, the question lingered: were these mere headlines or the prelude to a war Dixon foretold? In the tension of every handshake and the echo of every missile test, the prophecy's drumbeat grew louder. When the first shot cracks over the Siberian tundra, will history mark Dixon as seer or cynic? As winter's hold loosened over Lake Baikal in March 2025, something deeper began to shiver under the ice. Under cover of pre-dawn gloom, a convoy of Chinese surveyors escorted by lightly armed security contractors rolled into a disputed concession near the lake's eastern shore. Their mission: to prepare exploratory drills for rare earth deposits crucial to Beijing's booming electric vehicle industry. Officially sanctioned by a bilateral memorandum signed in Irkutsk the prior December, the operation nonetheless enraged local governors who saw in it the specter of economic colonization. By April 2nd, regional authorities had swooped in. In a dramatic dawn raid, FSB agents and Cossack militia surrounded the survey camp, detaining engineers and technicians. The Chinese contractors fought back. Stray gunfire echoed across the frozen taiga. When the smoke cleared, 23 bodies lay strewn among overturned drilling rigs, 10 Chinese and 13 Russians. Satellite imagery obtained later by independent analysts showed smoldering campfires on the Trans-Siberian Pipeline's right-of-way, severed valves pumping gas into the night sky like black volcanic plumes. Moscow's response was swift and merciless. Within days, elite Spetsnaz detachments were dispatched to the Amur and USS Yuri valleys with orders to secure critical infrastructure corridors. By early May, armored columns rumbled along snow-packed roads, their tracks carving scars across the tundra. Beijing answered in kind. On May 18th, the PLA's 1st Motorized Division crossed the frozen Heilongjiang River, its white camouflage howitzers bristling along the ice. On July 7th, commercial satellites released high-resolution images showing Chinese Type 96B tanks arrayed opposite Russian BMD infantry fighting vehicles, an almost surreal mirror of Dixon's prophecy. The dragon and the bear locked in mortal embrace. International mediators raced to avert all-out war. Envoys from Kazakhstan, Turkey, and the European Union convened emergency talks in Astana's gilded halls. But as diplomats hammered out ceasefire terms, both capitals issued ultimatums. Russia vowed to defend its sovereignty at any cost, while China insisted its mineral rights were inalienable. Words hardened into steel, and by August, artillery exchanges across the border passes had become nightly punctuations in the Siberian dark. Then, on August 15th, the new front erupted not with gun-toting brigades, but with lines of code. A massive distributed denial-of-service assault struck Russian railways control centers, halting troop trains and supply convoys at key junctions from Novosibirsk to Vladivostok. Passenger carriages sat stranded for days, their passengers huddled in frozen stations as food and fuel rotted on sidings. Within hours, a shadowy hacker collective calling itself Red Dragon claimed credit, boasting it had crippled Russia's logistical backbone. Retaliation came swiftly. Russian cyber brigadiers, operating under the codename Night Bear, unleashed their own assault on China's northeastern grids. For nearly 6 hours, power flickered out in Harbin, Chongqing, and Shenyang street lights died. Subways ground to a halt, and the hum of factories stilled. Emergency generators sputtered under the weight of winter's approach, and millions felt the chill of sudden darkness. In the eerie hush that followed, the air seemed to pulse with portent. From Lake Baikal, shattered camps to the frozen river crossings, and from the whir of servers to the roar of artillery, the first embers of Dixon's foretold conflict glowed. Siberia, land of ancient quiet and hidden depths, had become a crucible where the dragon's fire met the bear's frost, awaiting the spark that could ignite a war echoing around the world. As the polar night descended over the Kara Sea in December 2029, the roar of icebreakers shattered centuries of Arctic silence. 5 Chinese Type 270 to shallow draft vessels, each emblazoned with the red and gold of the People's Liberation Army Navy, plowed through newly thinned pack ice. Behind them, a flotilla of aging Project 20,380 corvettes, built in St. Petersburg but refit in Dalian, provided escort. Cameras aboard Western satellites recorded every creak and crunch as the Armada slipped eastward along the northern sea route, its destination obscured beneath a moonless sky. By New Year's Day, Marines raided Franz Joseph Land's weather stations and radio outposts, their silent Z-8 transport helicopters ghosting across the ice fields. Within hours, the tiny archipelago's landing strips were reflagged under Beijing's banner. Radars once dedicated to meteorology trained on the Barents Sea. In March 2030, the task force pressed onto Novaya Zemlya, seizing the abandoned Soviet oil platforms at Cape Jelenia and transforming them into fortified naval depots. News of the bold maneuver set NATO capitals scrambling. In Brussels, heated debates over invoking Article 5 stretched into the early hours. Should an attack on Arctic sovereignty count as an attack on all? In Oslo and Warsaw, brigades of Norway S6th Division and Pole and S18th Mechanized Brigade prepare to reinforce their Arctic flank. Yet the realities of frigid temperatures, shifting ice flows, and sparse logistics lines made any counteroffensive a gamble. Winter storms grounded C-130 cargo planes. Ice-strengthened container ships waited weeks for safe passage. By the time a relief convoy limped into Murmansk in April 2030, the PLA had already fortified remote ports with prefabricated runways and mobile missile batteries. As spring thaw turned to summer melt, China's foothold solidified. In October 2030, satellite imagery confirmed boreal forests on Franz Josef Land dotted with camouflage nets hiding anti-ship cruise missiles. Novaya Zemlya's bunkers bristled with HQ-9 surface-to-air systems. Meanwhile, Russia's northern fleet stretched thin by commitments in Eastern Europe, and the Arctic's vast expanse scrambled to redeploy its aging Project 22,350 frigates. But without repair yards close at hand, these vessels limped north in dribs and drabs, arriving too late to dislodge the PLA's garrison. The climactic blow fell in January 2031. Under cover of a solar storm that disrupted satellite links, PLA special forces descended on Murmansk's ice-free harbor. Using quietly smuggled trolling boats and silent underwater drones, they infiltrated the naval base's outer defenses. Within 6 hours, they controlled the quay and the city's power grid, severing the Northern Fleet's last Arctic lifeline. Moscow's desperate air assault for Tu-160 bombers ripping across polar darkness scattered the attackers, but failed to retake the port. Murmansk's fall reverberated through western capitals. With the Barents Sea choke point under foreign control, Russia's access to Atlantic convoys was effectively sealed. NATO's Emergency Council met again, this time to acknowledge a grim truth: the Dragon had outmaneuvered the Bear on its home ice. Analysts whispered of Jeane Dixon's prophecy, of that coded warning in 1969. For those who had followed her timeline, the image of the Bear staggering beneath the Dragon's advance was no longer myth, it was the new reality dawning over the Arctic wasteland. By the dawn of 2033, the Sahara's golden dunes had become a chessboard for two great powers. Beneath the blinding sun, Chinese state firms raced to develop sprawling lithium and cobalt mines, critical resources for the electric vehicle revolution, while Russia's Africa Corps, the Kremlin's rebranded mercenary arm, jockeyed for control of adjacent concessions. In Mali and Niger, local militias once loyal to Wagner now fought under the Africa Corps banner, ambushing Chinese survey teams and sabotaging rail spurs built to Hall or southward. China's answer came in the form of UN-mandated peacekeeping battalions. In early 2033, Beijing quietly expanded its deployment in Mali and Darfur to protect civilian and commercial corridors, stationing troops alongside African peacekeepers at key choke points around Agadez and Gao. What began as escort missions soon evolved into armed convoys escorting Chinese engineers past wooden barricades and landmine tracks. The result was a humanitarian catastrophe. Refugee camps swelled as nomadic Tuareg and Tubu communities caught between Russian-backed militias and PLA-guarded convoys fled into the Sahel's parched hinterlands. Humanitarian NGOs reported mass shortages of water and medicine. Wells once maintained by Chinese contractors lay in ruins after repeated attacks. International observers warned that Niger and Mali were careening toward a famine worse than that of the late 2020s. In the Levant, the sands of Syria and Lebanon bore the scars of another proxy battlefield. As Damascus rebuilt from years of civil war, Russian contractors dug bunkers along new oil and gas pipelines stretching from Deir ez-Zor toward the Mediterranean. Those pipelines meant to deliver eastern Syria's crude to Tartus became flashpoints for skirmishes with China-backed reconstruction teams in neighboring Baikal Valley. By mid-2034, Chinese engineers, protected by unmarked security detachments, had sealed a deal with Beirut to rehabilitate the aging Tripoli refinery and extend a cross-border fuel line from Homs. Russian contractors, angered at the diversion of Syrian oil toward Lebanon's ports, ambushed the convoys near the Arsal Hills. In one notorious engagement, Remote-controlled anti-tank drones supplied via Moscow raked a Chinese security escort, killing 7 and igniting riots in Zahel. These clashes underscored Jeane Dixon's warning of strikes in the sands. Neither side sought outright occupation. Both preferred to fight by proxy, leveraging local actors and asymmetric tactics. As 2035 dawned, the Nigerian storms and Syrian desert winds carried the same ominous echo. The dragon and the bear were no longer distant specters, but active combatants, their shadows cast across desert highways and refugee columns, setting the stage for a conflict whose next phase would erupt far beyond the heat-blasted dunes. Under a bruised autumn sky in October 2036, Cheetah's red brick citadel stood as Russia's last bastion in Trans Baikal. Months of sustained pressure had frayed its defenses. Supply convoys stalled at border checkpoints under Chinese economic sanctions, while hacked logistics networks left ammunition depots empty. From Beijing's war room came orders for a synchronized multi-domain assault cyber attacks to blind radar stations, precision airstrikes on forward supply hubs, and an economic blockade sealing rail lines through Mongolia. On the night of October 12th, cyber operators launched a devastating campaign against Russia's Northern Fleet communication satellites, severing Moscow's oversight of Cheetah's garrison. As early morning fog curled over the Onon River, J-20 stealth fighters streaked in, their missiles crippling the last functional S-400 battery. Simultaneously, mechanized brigades thrust eastward, crossing the Arkharchita highway and encircling the city in a pincer movement. Without supplies, with civilian morale crumbling under sustained blackouts and rationing, the Kremlin's defenders had no choice but to fall back behind Cheetah's walls, sealing their fate. By November, reports from independent monitors confirmed what Jeane Dixon cryptically foretold: the bear poised on its haunches, gasping beneath the dragon's talons. Think tank analyses published in early 2037 highlighted how China's anti-access blockade strategy first trialed in the South China Sea had been perfected on Russia's doorstep, combining economic strangulation with surgical strikes in cyberspace and the air. With winter's first snows dusting the far eastern steppe, back-channel peace talks commenced in Ulaanbaatar, facilitated by Mongolia and Kazakhstan. Yet when envoys arrived in mid-February 2037, they found Beijing's position unyielding. Russia must acknowledge a new balance of power or face total isolation. In Moscow, mounting public unrest sparked by scarcity of heating fuel and chronic blackouts drove hardliners to the negotiating table. The final armistice unfolded on June 13, 2037. In a live-streamed address beamed across 5 continents, China's president proclaimed, "The dragon has awoken and secured peace for the East." He spoke of a harmonious order under Beijing's stewardship, evoking Dixon's own words of divine intervention. Across the snowy plaza before Tiananmen, honor guards stood at attention, their banners flickering in the dawn light. In the Kremlin, a subdued announcement followed. Russia would cede contested zones, open its Arctic ports to Chinese commerce, and accept joint stewardship of critical infrastructure projects. Western capitals bristled at the New World Order, but sanctions fatigue and energy dependencies tempered any swift backlash. Thus ended the war Jeane Dixon predicted, one that began with skirmishes on the Siberian frontier and concluded with the dragon's triumphant ascendancy. As Beijing's red flags rose over Cheetah's gates, history's tides turned eastward, and the prophecy's final chapter closed in a silence profound as the Arctic night. As dawn breaks on the New World Order, the echoes of Jeane Dixon's warning still linger in every capital. In Brussels, once skeptical EU leaders now send envoys to Beijing, seeking trade deals and technology transfers that only China can deliver. Germany reopens talks on the new Silk Road, and French diplomats whisper of a strategic partnership built on mutual need rather than idealism. Across the Atlantic, the United States, its European allies shaken, announces a major redeployment of forces to the Indo-Pacific. New naval bases in Guam and Darwin prepare to host carrier strike groups, while Washington pours funding into alliances with Japan, Australia, and India. In New Delhi, decision-makers move with quiet urgency. India's defense budget surges to its highest share of GDP in decades, funding indigenous fighter programs and missile defenses designed to deter any future dragon-bear rivalry spilling south. The newly formed Quad Plus Forum expanded to include Vietnam and South Korea meets monthly to coordinate maritime patrols, intelligence sharing, and joint exercises under the shadow of China's polar reach. Meanwhile, Moscow reels from the economic fallout. The ruble, once a symbol of Russian resolve, tumbles to record lows, igniting hyperinflation in distant towns across Siberia. Western sanctions, lifted only grudgingly after the armistice, continue to throttle investment, while Beijing's grip on Arctic shipping routes and northern oil fields ensures Russia cannot easily pivot westward for relief. Chinese state firms now control 2/3 of the region's lithium and cobalt output, fueling the world's electric vehicle boom and cementing China's tech supremacy into the next generation. Yet amid geopolitical recalibrations and economic upheaval, a quieter question haunts the world. Was this conflict inevitable? Jeane Dixon's prophecy spoke of hubris of great powers blind to the fissures widening beneath their feet. Could the skirmishes at Lake Baikal or the seizure of Murmansk have been diffused through restraint? Could greater transparency in joint military exercises or earlier diplomatic outreach have bridged the mistrust that grew like frost beneath a fragile partnership? Perhaps the war's deepest lesson is vigilance. History does not sleep, and the cracks we ignore today, be they whispered disputes over pipelines or unseen cyber intrusions, can widen into chasms that swallow continents. As the dragon's red flags rise over former bear territories, the world must ask itself not only how to prevent another great conflict, but how to heed the subtle omens, both celestial and terrestrial, that Dixon urged us to watch. In her own words, divine intervention often waits for human neglect. The greatest victory, perhaps, lies not in triumph, but in the wisdom to recognize danger before the horn of war sounds. A hush falls again as we step back from the frozen steppes of Siberia and the wind-blown dunes of the Sahara. Jeane Dixon's 1969 warning, once scorned as the fever dream of a psychic, now reverberates through our headlines, our maps, our uneasy peace. From the crackle of artillery on the Amur River to the embered remains of Sahelian towns, her secret timeline has unfolded in four ominous phases, each echoing the tremors in our world today. Yet prophecy is not a prison, it is a lantern in the dark. Dixon's words do not bind us to an unalterable fate, they beckon us to vigilance. As the world hurtles toward the critical year of 2025, what role will you play in this unfolding drama? Will you remain a spectator, letting Dixon's vision crystallize into reality? Or will you step forward, delving into the complex dance of global diplomacy, demanding transparency from those who govern, and championing initiatives that build bridges instead of battlefields? Your voice matters. Share your reflections below. How can we transform ominous predictions into collective resolve for peace? If this deep dive into Dixon's hidden timeline stirred your curiosity and your conscience, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell to join our next expedition, Beyond Prophecy. Lessons from the Dragon's Triumph. In a world where the echoes of ancient warnings and modern headlines intertwine, foresight is our most potent shield. May the whispers of the past guide our choices, and may we choose the path that leads not to war, but to enduring peace.